They say betrayal doesn't always begin with lies. Sometimes it starts with trust. For a long time, I believed that love was enough to protect a marriage, that loyalty and hard work could shield us from temptation. I was wrong. Love alone isn't armor. Sometimes it's the very thing that leaves you defenseless. My name is James, and I was married to Lena for 5 years. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the perfect couple, the kind of pair people admired and envied. We laughed often, traveled when we could, and promised each other forever beneath the soft glow of our wedding lights. For a while, I thought we were living the dream. I worked as a marketing executive for a major firm, putting in long hours to build a stable future for us. My boss, Mr. Clark, was a man I respected deeply. Confident, persuasive, and successful. He was everything I wanted to become, and he seemed to genuinely believe in my potential. He often told me, "James, you're the kind of employee every company needs." His words motivated me. His approval mattered more than I'd like to admit. At home, Lena would ask about my work, her eyes lighting up whenever Clark's name came up. I assumed she admired my dedication, that she was proud of me. I never imagined there was something darker behind those questions. There were moments, small, insignificant things, that should have warned me. A strange silence when I came home early, her sudden obsession with looking presentable, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. But I ignored it. I told myself every couple goes through phases. Looking back now, I realized I wasn't blind. I just didn't want to see. Because the truth waiting for me was one that would burn everything I thought I knew, my marriage, my career, and my sense of self. And it all started with the one man I trusted most. In the beginning, Lena and I were inseparable. We met at a small cafe downtown. She was reading a novel, sipping coffee, and smiling at something on her phone. I remember thinking she looked like the kind of person who carried sunlight with her wherever she went. One conversation turned into hours of laughter, and within a few months, I couldn't imagine my life without her. Our wedding was simple but full of love. Friends cheered. Families cried, and when we exchanged vows, I felt like the luckiest man alive. We moved into a cozy house with creaking wooden floors and a backyard big enough for her dream garden. I worked, she painted, and our nights were filled with quiet dinners, shared stories, and plans of the future. We weren't rich, but we were happy, or at least I believe we were. I thought love would always be enough to keep us close. When I was promoted at work, Lena hugged me with tears in her eyes and said, "You're finally getting what you deserve." Her pride in me became my strength. But as months turned into years, something began to change. My promotion came with longer hours, late-night meetings, and weekend calls. I told myself it was temporary, that I was working hard for us. I didn't notice that while I was climbing the corporate ladder, our marriage was quietly slipping away. Lena became quieter, more distant. She started spending evenings out with friends, returning home long after midnight. When I'd ask, she'd smile faintly and say, "Don't worry, James. You work so hard. You should rest." Her words were gentle, but they carried a wall I couldn't climb. I tried to make it better. Weekend trips, surprise dinners, flowers. She appreciated them, or at least pretended to, but her warmth had faded into politeness. The woman who once kissed me with laughter in her eyes now avoided my touch like it was a question she couldn't answer. At work, my boss, Mr. Clark, seemed to take notice of my dedication. He was charismatic, confident, the kind of man people listened to when he entered a room. He began inviting me to dinners, introducing me to influential clients, even giving me advice about marriage. "You've got to make her feel seen," he'd say with a knowing smile. I admired him, trusted him, maybe even envied him. What I didn't realize was that while I was busy chasing his approval, he was already chasing something, or rather, someone much closer to home. From the outside, our lives still looked perfect. People would comment on how lucky we were, how strong our marriage seemed. I smiled and agreed, never guessing that behind those smiles, betrayal was already quietly blooming, in the space where love used to live. It didn't happen all at once. Betrayal rarely does. It seeps in quietly. A look too long, a word too soft, a silence that lingers just a little longer than it should. At first, I told myself Lena was simply tired, that the distance between us was nothing more than the weight of routine. But deep down, something had changed. Her laughter no longer filled the house the way it used to. Our conversations, once endless and effortless, had turned into short exchanges about bills, groceries, and schedules. Even the way she said my name sounded different, emptier, colder. She began paying more attention to her appearance. I noticed the new dresses, the perfume she hadn't worn in years, the way she spent extra time in front of the mirror before leaving the house. When I'd ask if she was meeting her friends, she'd nod, avoiding my eyes, her voice light but unsteady. Yes, just catching up with Sarah and the girls. But when I called Sarah one evening to check, she sounded confused. They hadn't met in weeks. That's when the unease started growing inside me, a sharp, invisible thing I couldn't name. I began noticing her phone habits. She never left it lying around anymore. It was always face down, always on silent. When I walked into the room, she locked the screen instantly or shifted out of sight. Once, I caught her smiling at her phone, a shy, secretive smile I hadn't seen in years, a smile that wasn't for me. One night, as we sat watching TV, her phone buzzed. She picked it up quickly, typing something before slipping it under cushion. I laughed nervously and said, "Who's keeping you so busy?" She didn't look up. "Just work stuff," she murmured. The next morning, I noticed her phone was gone from the nightstand. She had started sleeping with it under her pillow at work. I began hearing Clark's name in her stories. "Your boss is so charming," she'd say casually. "He seems to really care about you." I thought she was being supportive, proud, even. It never crossed my mind that those comments were the beginning of something darker. The signs were all there, the late nights, the fading warmth, the sudden secrecy, but I refused to see them. I kept making excuses. I told myself every marriage has rough patches, that maybe I was just being paranoid. I love her too much to believe she could ever hurt me like that. And yet, each time she smiled while glancing at her phone, each time she came home smelling a cologne that wasn't mine, a quiet dread grew heavier in my chest. Looking back now, I realized the betrayal had already begun. I was simply too blinded by love, or perhaps denial, to recognize that the woman I adored was already slipping away, piece by piece, into the arms of another man. It was a Friday night, the kind of night that should have ended in peace. I had just finished a long week at the office when Mr. Clark called to say our late-night meeting had been postponed. I remember feeling almost relieved. For once, I'd be home early. I even decided to stop by Lena's favorite restaurant to pick up dinner, thinking maybe a quiet evening together could bring us closer again. As I drove home, I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd apologize for being distant, how I'd tell her I missed her. I pictured her surprised smile, the way her eyes used to light up when she saw me. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. When I reached the house, it was dark, except for the faint glow of light seeping through the bedroom curtains. I assumed she was asleep, but as I stepped inside, something felt off. The air was heavy, too still, too quiet. I set the food down on the kitchen counter and called out her name softly. No answer. Then I heard it. Faint laughter. A low voice followed, deep and familiar. My stomach twisted. My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I walked down the hallway slowly, my hands trembling. The door to our bedroom was slightly open. A crack of light cut across the floor like a blade. I took one step closer, then another, until I could see shadows moving behind the door. When I pushed it open, time seemed to stop. There they were, Lena and Clark, tangled in our sheets, in our bed, my wife and my boss. Her face turned pale the moment she saw me, and his confident smile vanished in an instant. The sound that left my throat wasn't quite a scream, not quite a cry, more like the sound of something breaking deep inside. The takeout bag slipped from my hand, spilling onto the floor. For a second, none of us moved. The silence was unbearable. Clark reached for his shirt, mumbling something about a mistake, while Lena stammered, "James, please, I can explain." Explain what? That my love, my loyalty, my sacrifices, all of it, had been nothing but a joke to her? That while I was building a life for us, She was destroying it in the arms of another man. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. She wasn't the Lena I fell in love with. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the room. My legs felt weak, my vision blurred, but somehow I made it to the front door. The night air hit me like a wave of reality. I stood there for a long time, staring at the dark sky, wondering how everything I'd built could collapse in a single heartbeat. That night, something inside me died, not just love, but trust, too. The night after I walked out felt endless. I sat in my car for hours, staring at nothing, replaying the image in my head. Lena and Clark tangled together in our bed, their faces painted with guilt and fear. Every time I closed my eyes, the scene returned, sharper, crueler, like a wound that refused to stop bleeding. I didn't go back inside. I couldn't. I drove aimlessly through the city until dawn, the streets empty, my heart heavy with disbelief. The sunrise looked foreign that morning, as if the world had kept moving while mine had stopped. When I finally returned home, the house felt haunted. Her perfume still lingered in the air, her scarf draped carelessly over the couch. The sheets, those same sheets, were stripped from the bed, but it didn't matter. The damage was already carved deep into my soul. Lena tried to talk to me that morning. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her eyes red and swollen. "James," she whispered, "please, let me explain." Explain what? That the man who'd mentored me had been sleeping with my wife? That the home I worked so hard to build had turned into a crime scene of betrayal? I stared at her in silence. I didn't have the strength to yell. I just felt empty. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. It didn't mean anything. I laughed, not out of amusement, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. Didn't mean anything. Those words cut deeper than any confession could. "You destroyed our marriage for something that didn't mean anything?" I said quietly. She broke down crying, but her tears didn't move me. It was too late for remorse. I packed a small bag and left that day. I couldn't stay under the same roof that held so much deceit. The moment I walked out the door, it felt like leaving behind a version of myself I no longer recognized. The trusting husband, the man who believed love could survive anything. At work, Clark avoided me. He acted as if nothing had happened, as if our unspoken secret could be buried under polite smiles and professional talk. Every meeting, every casual word from him felt like poison. I watched him laugh, shake hands, give speeches. The same man who had ruined my life without a flicker of remorse. My anger grew quietly, festering in the shadows of my silence. I stopped eating. I barely slept. Every moment of peace was invaded by her voice, her laughter, her betrayal. Friends noticed the change in me. They said I looked hollow, like a ghost of myself. Maybe they were right, because the man I used to be, the forgiving, gentle one, was gone. In his place stood someone colder, sharper, someone who wanted justice. That was when a thought first entered my mind, a dangerous, intoxicating thought that whispered in the dark. They took everything from me. Maybe it's time I take something back. Revenge wasn't something I planned overnight. It began as a whisper, faint, uncertain, a shadow following me wherever I went. I told myself I didn't care. That walking away was enough. But the truth was, I couldn't forget. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. Every time I stepped into the office and saw Clark's smug face, the whisper grew louder. Make him pay. At first, I tried to fight it. I buried myself in work, pretending nothing had changed. But anger has a way of feeding on silence. It doesn't fade, it festers. It turns into something sharp, something that demands to be heard. So I began to watch, carefully, quietly. Clark thought he had me fooled, that his power and position made him untouchable. But men like him always leave traces. I started collecting small details, overheard conversations, misplaced documents, whispers from colleagues. I learned that my respected boss wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He had a habit of sleeping with other women in the company, too. Some were interns, some were married, and some had stories they were too afraid to tell. Piece by piece, I gathered evidence. screenshots, emails, photos, enough to destroy him. I created a folder, one simple name on it, Truth. Meanwhile, Lena kept trying to reach out. She sent long messages filled with apologies, memories, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I didn't respond. Forgiveness wasn't on my mind anymore. Justice was. Then came the day Clark crossed the line again. During a meeting, he looked at me with that same arrogant smirk and said, "James, don't take life so seriously. Sometimes you've got to know when to move on." The room laughed. He thought he'd humiliated me. In that moment, I decided it was time. That night, I sent everything to the company's board of directors. Every screenshot, every photo, every name. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The truth spoke loudly enough. Within days, the walls began to crumble. The board launched an internal investigation. Clark was suspended, then terminated. His reputation, the one he'd spent decades building, collapsed overnight. The media picked up the story, and soon his name became synonymous with scandal. Lena called me the day the news broke. Her voice shook. "What did you do, James?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For a brief moment, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but silence. The kind that comes after a storm. I had taken back control, piece by piece, from the man who had stolen everything from me. But as the dust settled and the world moved on, I realized revenge doesn't heal. It burns, and sometimes it leaves scars deeper than the wounds that started it. Still, at that moment, I told myself one thing. If destruction was the only language they understood, then I had finally spoken it fluently. When the storm finally passed, I expected to feel free. I thought that once Clark was ruined and Lena was exposed, the weight in my chest would finally lift. But instead of relief, there was only silence, the kind that sits heavy on your shoulders and makes you question everything. Clark's downfall was swift and merciless. Within a week, his name was everywhere, in newspapers, on company memos, whispered through hallways. The board stripped him of his position, and the women he had manipulated finally came forward. He tried to deny everything at first, but the evidence I'd gathered left no room for lies. His empire crumbled, and with it, his arrogance. Lena wasn't spared either. The affair became public knowledge, and word spread quickly among our friends and family. People she once called her closest allies turned away from her. Invitations stopped coming. Even her own parents, humiliated and heartbroken, distanced themselves. The woman who once walked through life with confidence now moved like a ghost, invisible, unwanted. She came to see me one evening, months after it all fell apart. I almost didn't open the door. But when I saw her, eyes swollen, face pale, the sparkle gone, I felt something unexpected. Not hate, not anger, but a deep, tired pity. "James," she said softly, "I've lost everything." I looked at her for a long time, searching for the woman I had once loved. But she was gone. The betrayal had killed more than just our marriage. It had taken away the light from both our lives. "You chose this," I said finally, my voice calm but cold. "And I chose to end it." Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't love him," she whispered. "It was a mistake, a stupid, selfish mistake." I nodded slowly. "And some mistakes can't be undone." She left without another word. I watched her walk away, her figure fading into the dim evening light. And for the first time, I didn't feel rage or grief, only emptiness, the quiet kind that follows when there's nothing left to lose. Revenge had given me justice, but it hadn't given me peace. I destroyed them, yes, but somewhere in the process, I destroyed a part of myself too. Time is a strange way of healing wounds, not by erasing them, but by teaching you how to live with the scars. Months passed, and though the anger slowly faded, the memories remained. Some nights, I still woke up to echoes of that moment. The door creaking open, the sight that tore my world apart. But the pain was duller now, like a bruise that had stopped throbbing. I spent those months rebuilding myself from the ashes. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years. I took long drives with no destination, learned how to enjoy silence instead of fearing it. I found peace not in forgetting, but in understanding. Betrayal had broken me, yes, but it also stripped away everything false, leaving behind the truth of who I really was. There was a time I believed revenge would give me closure. It didn't. It only mirrored my pain back at me. What finally freed me wasn't vengeance. It was acceptance. I had to let go of the image of who I thought Lena was, and of who I used to be with her. Only then could I begin to breathe again. One evening, I stood outside our old house, now empty, quiet, lifeless. The garden she once tended had overgrown, wild and untamed, much like my heart had been. I smiled faintly, not in sadness. Friday nights had always been my favorite. She broke me in my own home, the quiet hum of the city, myself. But I built something stronger from what was left. The comforting thought that the week's battles were finally over. I turned away from that evening felt no different. Not because I forgot, except for the excitement, because I had finally learned to live beyond it. My girl.